What a pleasure to be here in this space, speaking to academics, artists, scholars, activists who are interested in, Indian Ocean studies and thinking more broadly about Indian Ocean environments and enslavement. I just wanted to give an advance apology that there's a storm raging outside in Shirampur, where I am currently. And in case I suddenly get disconnected, please be patient with me. I'll try to log in again. So I'll share my screen. I do want to say that my presentation is divided into two parts. In the first 10 or 12 minutes or so, I'm going to provide a sort of context of where I'm coming from when I'm talking about a poet like Kama la Mackerel. And the next part of my presentation is actually a performance. It's a whacking piece. It's a dance piece that I have created in response to Mackerel's poems. I will speak more about that, but I just wanted to convey that to the moderators and my colleagues present here. Share my screen. Is it visible to everyone? Can I get a thumbs up, please? Thank you so much. All right. So my presentation is titled Towards an Archipelagic Feminist Worldmaking, Reading, Performing, Gender and Environment in Kama la Mackerel. What does it mean to respond to the legacy of enslavement, indentured labor, and its relationship with the environment as a queer and non-binary poet? To answer this question in this presentation performance, I take up the written poetry and performance of Mauritian-Canadian poet and multidisciplinary artist Kama la Mackerel's work, Zomfam. A few words about Zomfam and Mackerel as an artist, just to orient readers and performers who are not familiar with their work. So Kama la Mackerel, they are a spoken word poet, textile artist, and also, really brings alive their poetry through theater and this multi-site performances where they directly interact with the ocean, with the mud, with the sand. I would highly encourage everyone present here to go look up their work. It's really interesting and engrossing. So the book or the text that I'm going to be talking about in relation to Mackerel's work started as a series of spoken word poems that they performed in a cabaret. So this is a screenshot of one of the YouTube poems that they were reading out back in 2015 when they finally first started thinking about Zomfam. So Zomfam initially started not on the pages of the text, but it started in a cabaret as spoken word poems. And then what happens is Mackerel decides to publish this sort of long poems in 2020, which is also the pandemic year. And if you can see the cover image, it's a piece of textile art that they created with collaboration with other artists. And initially the plan was that Zomfam would be staged and there would be audience who would be cheering. But of course the pandemic changed the plans a lot. But after the pandemic kind of stabilized, one can never say that it's over. Zomfam is finally performed on stage. I have not had the privilege to directly see the performance, but I have seen trailers, bits and pieces on YouTube here and there. So it has really taken that journey from the spoken word to the pages of the book, and then again coming back to the stage. It has really had that very interesting journey. So today, the two questions that I am posing in relation to Mackerel's work is that what kind of feminist and queer methods are foregrounded by Indian Ocean poets and artists that acknowledge the legacy of enslavement, but also go beyond that to articulate a future for the planet, for Indian Ocean. And I think that one of this queer feminist method needs to be through movement, especially considering that movement is such a huge part of the vocabulary of Mackerel. And the second question that I ask is, what new vocabularies of reparation emerge when the movement form of whacking, punking, I'll be talking about this in a bit, interacts with the queer poetics of Indian Ocean world? I have to acknowledge the people who have done the work before me. I am thankful to my colleague and friend Nilofer Kadir, also with us today, who has written on Shailaja Patel's book, Migritudes, Decolonial Lessons, where she is also talking about sort of the multimodality of the text and what that does to Indian Ocean feminist methods. I am grateful to Natasha Tinsley for their work on the Black Atlantic and Queer Atlantic, from which I have learned a lot from. And I have to acknowledge the work of Shangra Mukhopadhyay. He's an artist, performer from Bengal. And I'm very thankful that he has also had an opportunity to join us today, who has created this brilliant work. It's on YouTube. I'll put a link on Pani Ki Kahani, which is also a take on, sort of navigating spaces, domestic spaces, liminal spaces, private spaces through the genre of whacking. It's a brilliant piece. Everybody should go and watch. Now that we are done with that introduction, I wanted to talk about what is my argument in this text that I'm going to be talking about. So I argue that queer poetics and Mackerel's work in the form of invocation, playful typography, one that you can see directly on the page right now. It is really, as Mackerel says, the body inscribed on the pages of in the form of words, or chants on the stage perform a form of world making, where the environment on a plantation island such as Mauritius is simultaneously violent, as well as the materiality of archipelagic geography, insists on a form of poetics that is reparative. Through their archipelagic poetics, Mackerel articulates a vocabulary of understanding the complexity of enslavement and gender that is attuned to the tension between plural femme voices that make up their poetry and the silencing of queer lives in archives concerning enslavement. Mackerel's queer and feminist vocabulary of Indian Ocean archipelagic thought, especially when we are talking about enslavement and environment, invites me as a practitioner of languages, poetry, and movement to adopt a form of presentation that moves away from conventional idioms of conference presentation. Though what I'm doing right now is very much orienting the audience present here to that kind of a presentation. But while engaging with Mackerel's work, I realized that perhaps if there is some way I could do some justice to their work is to see that what happens when movement form like whacking emerges with another form of queer poetics. So indeed, what I'm trying to do in this presentation is sort of bring together the archipelagicity of forms. Like at once, this presentation is, a kind of like drawing on the genres of a formal presentation, but also as I gradually go into the presentation, I have written a piece in response to Mackerel's work, which is a prose poem, and I'm going to be performing on that. So I really see that the work that Indian Ocean Studies needs to do right now is sort of not just thinking about what we are talking about, but also how. It's not about always the content, but the method and the structure which we are enacting in our work. And you can probably hear the thunder and lightning in my background, which makes this work possible, or which makes this work happen. So I'm going to be talking about, three components, talking about two components and performing the third. The first that I want to talk about is breath work. So breath work constitutes an important aspect in the poetry and performance of Mackerel. It is a poetic device that they use to activate the expansion and contraction of the chest, the lungs, and the body in a way that it is a direct conversation with the salty air of the island, the humidity, the musky fumes, and the gentleness of moss. Black feminist scholar Christina Sharp has argued that weather is anti-Black. And what I see Mackerel doing in conversation to her work is, is recasting the externality of the weather inwards into the body, to seek out stories that tell a different narrative of living in a formerly enslaved plantation colony. Consider these lines. The unknown spaces where there are stories hidden that you are yet to discover. Like the unsent letters you wrote, wrapped in tender green fabric and coconut rope, hidden under the pile of clothes in your chest. Indeed, a lot of stories that often get concealed, hidden, never revealed, lies in the letters that are written but never sent, or sent but never reached. The materiality of the paper, the words, the coconut rope, enmesh to create a textured poetics of unweathering against the anti-Black weather. They remain unweathered precisely because the words remain within the crevices of the body, or as they write, like the sediment in the marrow, sandstone in your throat, and mud on the tongue. When the body creates an environment with its own method of processing emotions against the anti-Blackness of weather, the poetics of breathwork, of inhalation, exhalation, holding, release, facilitates the process of understanding weather, as that is not external to the body. But my argument is that the weather is formed by the body. Part 2, list. As a scholar of post-colonial studies, my work has always been to shift the paradigm of understanding the everyday from the lens of capitalist production and a product to thinking of the everyday as an embedded practice, which is grounded in a geography as a specific point of time. When it comes to a phenomena such as climate emergency, which is enmeshed with the quotidian life in the archipelagos, legibility of the everyday can come in moments least expected. For context, everyday or ordinary in the Indian Ocean world, and especially in the poetry of Mackerel, is constituted using the dual lens of carving space and being attentive to routinized and mechanized activities. In one of the poems, Existence is Gender Survivance, Mackerel writes, "You wrap yourself in domesticity, a blanket of safety. You make yourself small, molding your figure to fit in nooks between the fridge and the kitchen door, between the sink and the gas stove." I read the stanza of making oneself small, or the deliberate attempt to keep oneself concealed in the mundane and banal objects of household, fridge, kitchen, sink, gas stove, and seeking refuge in domesticity as a way to challenge the hyper-masculine politics of visibility and taking up space in an island that has seen the violence of empire in the form of endangered labor. What the protagonist of the poem literally does is adjust and accommodate themselves. Mackerel writes that there are spaces where one learns the basic skills of cooking for survival. Spaces where you learn to slaughter a chicken, to gut a fish, to grind garlic, ginger, and saffron, dried chilies and curry leaves on a polished slab of black stone. The activities that are listed are mundane, commonplace, and banal. I argue that growing up genderqueer in a patriarchal island becomes challenging. Routine activities restore a sense of ordinary semblance and act as fundamental acts of care that allows one to pick up pieces and go ahead. I'm also interested in this juxtaposition of the action verbs slaughter, cut, and grind with the quotidian ingredients found in the kitchen, such as dried chilies and curry leaves. This objects lends a sense of familiarity that enables the speaker to grapple with the tension of everyday life. Furthermore, Mackerel writes that spaces also act as spaces of transformation, radical hope, and sites of solidarity and friendship. And it is the space that I'm going to use to think about more, more explicitly about what understandings of space or what understanding of movement can do to poetry or understanding of enslavement and environment. Movement. So, and with this, I come to the second part of the presentation. So before I move on to the actual piece, a prose poem that I have written in response to Mackerel's work while, quoting Mackerel where required, I was introduced to a form called punking, walking, whacking. There is a lot of history and controversy around these names that I am happy to speak about, but also it's a long story. I got interested in this dance form back in August. I was I was coming out of a situationship, for the lack of a better word, and that's when I found whacking in my life. Whacking emerged as a dance form in the clubs of Los Angeles, LA, in the late 1960s, 1970s, during the disco era. And this was also the time of, anti-gay legal system in the US, right? Some of the common elements of this dance form are like, it is usually performed to disco music, but of course, any dance form, any movement form with time, with space, it will evolve, it has changed. And we have workers between us who has shown how that change can happen, in what way that change can happen. So very grateful for that. But the two key components of whacking is that, pose, because it was very influenced by Hollywood actress and Nunchuck by Bruce Lee. And the second is strike, which is, it is again very much inspired by comic books, where you're literally striking with force with your arm. But you're not always striking, it can also be done slowly. What happened in the 1980s and 1990s was, of course, punking, whacking was very much present, but the AIDS epidemic definitely had wreaked a havoc on the community. And then it was always there. One can never say that something disappeared. And there is always a lot of debate, controversy around the history of punking, whacking, and I'm only sharing this because I know that it's a safe space to share this. So what happens after, in the 10 or 20 years when whacking was present, but not quite there? In 2003 in New York, there is again a resurgence of this form that happens in New York. So Tyrone Proctor, who was one of the OGs who was still alive, comes back from retirement, again starts teaching this form to the next generation of backers, like Princess Lokuru, Kumari Suraj, Lip J. And from there, gradually, I think it starts spreading to the rest of the world, which is again a very interesting history in itself. So this is a movement form that has emerged out of the Black and Latinx gay communities in LA. So to be bringing this form, one form of movement form, to the written poetics of Mackerel's work could yield a different grammar and vocabulary of its own, right? I do not know what the vocabulary is going to look like, because what I'm going to perform right now, it is not a choreographed piece. It is very much a freestyle performance. And consider this as I'm very much a beginner in this dance form. Consider this as a form of humble tribute to an artist whose work I really admire, and to also whacking artists, one of whom present here, who has really paved the way for us to do this kind of work, and I'm very, very thankful for that. So I'll just quickly stop sharing my screen and share the audio. It's a prose poem that I have written, dedicating it to Mackerel. The shoulder, the heart,
The cheek,
Is it audible?
the arms, the scapular muscles are in a symphony. As I read the tactility that translates across the pages.
We can't hear anything. Suddenly,
Yeah,
suddenly
I'm
off.
going to reshare it because I have not taken my position yet. That was a bit of a check.
The shoulder, the heart, the cheek, the arms, the scapular muscles are in a symphony. As I read the tactility that translates across the pages to my being and asks, how does the body live, survive, remember, even as it is being constantly disembodied through image, violence, and oil spills across Mauritius? Mackerel's words reminds us, your skin will spread and rise, stretched out vertically like a sculpture, a monument demanding to exist, to be recognized, to occupy space. As a reminder that when enslavement imposes limits on space, body, imagination, and the environment, the body offers languages of repair through abundance. Abundance of breathing, abundance of care, abundance of spirituality, abundance of histories, and as Mackerel writes, abundance of voices refusing to be silent, songs refusing to disappear, screams demanding their oscillations be heard in the ripples of the ocean. Abundance is an act of repair. I read of Rita, Kathai, Kamla, Uma, Lalita, Asha, and Devika. The famed tongues that they invoke. Women whose intimacy with the soil, the sand, the salt, and the waves shape the way for another future, the tomorrow of the present and the present of the plantation. The grain, the names, the invocation are tied by a thread of the present that resists the largeness, the aftermath of living in the wake of plantation slavery. Abundance is an act of repair. Smallness is an act of repair. Invocation is an act of repair. The body finds a space through, around your body. Spaces that hold you, embrace you gently, and chide you as you make your way through the experiences of queerness. The intimacy of queerness resists the ship, plantation, and the prison, the geographies of enslavement. Or as Mackerel writes, spaces where you learn to slaughter a chicken, to gut a fish, to grind garlic, ginger, saffron, dried chilies, and curry leaves on a polished slab of black stone. It is in these spaces that you learn to witness fame intimacies, storytelling, gossip, sisterhood, support, softness, pointed and sharp like a cooking blade. Mackerel writes, it is in these spaces you learn the value of honoring. It is in these spaces you learn the virtue of worship. The body is an archipelago of experiences, of intergenerational building, of coming together of new languages. The archipelago has always been the site of queering history through fragments, lists, bodies, breath, and desire.
Thank you. That brings to the end of my presentation.